International trade. Mercantilism suggests that countries should increase export and decrease import. Smith's theory was first to explain why unrestricted free trade is beneficial to a country. Free trade refers to a situation in which a government does not influence what a country exports and what they can import. Why is international trade beneficial? The theory of Smith, Ricardo, and Heckscher-Ohlin says that a country's economy can go up if the citizens buy certain products from other countries that could be produced locally. The reason that the economy can go up is because this allows the country to specialize in manufacture and export products more efficiently and import products that other countries specialize in. A country has an absolute advantage when the production is more efficient than another country. Comparative advantage is when a country specializes in the production of one product and buys other products from other countries that specializes it. Potential world production is better with unrestricted free trade. Comparative advantage suggests that trade is positive where countries that participate in this trade all gain. The theory of Smith, Ricardo, and Heckscher-Ohlin helps with explaining the pattern of international trade. Climate and natural resources explains in terms of international difference in labor productivity, proportion and the factors of production in different countries and proportion needed for a good. Response to the failure of Heckscher-Ohlin theory to explain the international trade pattern was proposed by Raymond Vernon on the product of life theory. It explains that at the beginning, new products are produced and exported from the country it was developed. But as the product is recognized internationally, the product starts to be produced in other countries and might be exported back to the country that it was first developed. The new trade theory stresses that countries specializes and export certain products because in certain industries, the world market can only support a certain amount of firms. Extensions of the Ricardian model. Immobile resources. In a country, it is not easy to change from producing one good to another good. It takes more efforts. When an advanced country embraces free trade, it will mean less production of labor-intensive goods and more knowledge-intensive goods, which would mean that some will be unemployed and accept less attractive jobs. Diminishing returns. This happens when more units of resources are needed to produce each additional unit. The first reason for this is because not all the resources have the same quality. Countries try to increase output, but the productivity will not be as great. Second reason is because different goods use different proportion of resources. And overall, free trade is still beneficial, but the gains may not be as great. Dynamic effect and economic growth. First, free trade can increase a country's stock resources because labor and capital from abroad becomes available. Second, free trade can increase the efficiency of a country of using the resources. Trade, job, and wages. The Samuelson critique. The Samuelson critique looks at what happens when a rich country goes into a free trade agreement with a poor country that improves rapidly its productivity. The lower prices that consumers pay in the rich country for goods coming from a poor country will not be enough to produce a net gain for the economy. The evidence for the link between trade and growth has shown by a study of 100 countries made by Jeffrey Sachs and Andrew Warner. The results were that in developing countries, the ones that were open grew by 4.49% per year, and the closed ones grew only by 0.69% per year. In the developed countries, the open ones grew at 2.29% per year, and the closed ones grew at 0.74% per year. New trade theory focuses on increasing product variety and reducing cost and economies of scale. New trade theory suggests that nations can benefit from trade even when they have differences in resources, endowments, or technologies. Also suggests that a country can be dominating in the export of a good just because they are lucky that one or more firms in a country were the first to produce the good. Porter's diamond. Porter's diamond theorizes that four broad attributes of nation shapes the environment that local firms compete in, and these attributes pushes competitive advantage. Porter argues that firms are most likely to succeed in the segments where the diamond is the most favorable. Porter says that there are two additional variables that can influence the national diamond, which are chance and government. The four attributes. Factor endowments is the center of the Heckscher-Ohlin theory, although it is the same idea, but Porter also analyzes the characteristics of factors of production. Demand condition, home demands for the industry's product or service. Related and supporting industries, presence and absence of suppliers and similar industries that are internationally competitive. Firm strategy, structure, and rivalry. First, nations are characterized by different management ideologies. It can help or not help for competitive advantages. Second, there is an association between domestic rivalry and the creation and persistence of competitive advantage. Domestic rivalry pushes domestic firms to look for better improvement and creates pressure for more innovation. Trade policy uses 7 main instruments. Tariffs. Tax levied on imports. Specific tariffs is a fixed charge for each good imported. Ad valorem tariffs is the proportion of the value of the good. Subsidies. Government payment towards a domestic producer. Import quotas and voluntary export restraints. Import quota is the restriction of the quantity of goods that can be imported into a country. Tariff quota is a mix of quota and tariff, where a lower tariff rate is applied to imports that is within the quota. Voluntary export restraint is a quota on trade imposed by the exporting country, usually the government. Export tariffs and bans. Export tariff is the tax that's been placed on the export of a good. An export ban is a policy that partially or entirely restricts the export of a good. Local content requirements. Local content requirements is a requirement that some specific fraction of a good be produced domestically. Administrative policies are bureaucratic rules to make it difficult for imports to enter a country. Anti-dumping policies. Dumping is selling goods in a foreign market. Anti-dumping policies is designed to punish foreign firms that engage in dumping. Government intervention takes 2 paths. 1. Political, which they are concerned about protecting the interest of certain group in a nation. 2. Economical, which is about boosting the overall wealth of a nation. Some political argument of intervention are protecting jobs and industries, protecting national security, retaliating, protecting consumers, furthering foreign policy objectives, protecting human rights. And some economic argument for intervention. The infant industry argument. This argument suggests that in developing countries, new manufacturing industries cannot compete with already established manufacturing companies. Also, the argument relies on an assumption that firms cannot make efficient long-term investments by borrowing money from banks. Strategic trade policy. It argues that with appropriate actions, government can help raise national income if they can ensure that the firms gain first-mover advantages in an industry are domestic. Second, it might pay a government to intervene to help domestic firms. Foreign direct investment. The flow of FDI is the amount of FDI undertaken over a period of time. The stock of FDI is the total accumulated value of foreign-owned asset at a given time. The outflows of FDI is the flow of FDI going out of a country. Inflows of FDI is the flow of FDI into a country. A greenfield investment involves the establishment of a new operation in a foreign country. Why foreign direct investment? Limitations of exporting. The successfulness of exporting goods is often limited due to transportation costs and trade barriers. When the transportation costs are added to the production costs, it becomes unprofitable to transport product for a large distance, especially for products that are small, not heavy, and that can be produced anywhere around the world. Limitations of licensing. According to the internalization theory, licensing had 3 major drawbacks. 1. Licensing might cause firms to give away valuable technological knowledge to a potential foreign competitor. Licensing doesn't give a tight control on production, marketing, and strategy in a foreign country. And 3. The license might not be able to fully exploit the potential profit inherent in a foreign market. The pattern of foreign direct investment. Strategic behavior. Imitative behavior can be in many different forms. One example would be that as one firm raises prices, the other would follow. Or if one firm expands their capacity and the other firms follow, to not be at a disadvantage. Firms in oligopolistic industries tend to imitate each other's FDI. Oligopoly is an industry that is composed of a limited number of large firms. Multi-point competition is when 2 or more enterprises encounter each other in different regional or national market. It would be like a chess game, trying to fight for the advantage, try to match each other's moves, and trying to hold each other in check. Host country costs and benefits of FDI. Host country benefits. Resource transfer effects. The benefits are that FDI can bring capital, technology, and the management resources to the host country, and bringing economic growth. Employment effects. FDI brings jobs to a host country. The direct effect of employment when MNE employs a certain number of host country citizens. Indirect effect is that job increases due to investment and increased local spending by employees of the MNE. Balance of payment effect. Balance of payment accounts track both payments and receipts of a country. Current account tracks the export and import of goods and services. Government prefer to see a current account surplus, and by selling assets to foreigners can keep the surplus for a long term. FDI is a substitute for imports of goods and services. It can help with improving the current account of the host country's balance of payment. When the MNE uses a foreign subsidiary to export goods and services to other countries, which will help increase the exports of host countries. Effect on competition and economic growth. When FDI invests, there will be more enterprises, which increases the number of players in the national market. This will increase the choices for consumers, increase the competition, which decrease the product and service price. In the long term, it will increase productivity growth, product and innovation processes, and better economic growth. FDI's impact on the competition in the domestic market and the telecommunication, retailing, and many financial services. Host country costs. Adverse effects on competition. Host governments worry that MNE may have greater economic power than the indigenous competitors. If it is a larger international organization, the foreign push indigenous companies out of the business. This would allow firms to monopolize the market, which would raise the price above the competitive market and causing harmful effect on the economic of the host market. Adverse effects on the balance of payments. 1. Initial inflow coming from FDI needs to be subsequent outflow of earnings from foreign subsidiary to the parent company. But this outflow shows up as capital outflow on the balance of payment. In order to respond to this, governments restrict the amount of earnings that can be repatriated to foreign subsidiaries' home country. 2. When foreign subsidiary imports a substantial number of its inputs abroad, it will result in a debit on the current account of the host country's balance of payment. Possible effects on national sovereignty and autonomy. Some host countries would be concerned of the loss of economic independence. They are scared that key decisions affecting the host country will be made by foreign parent that has no commitment to the host country. Home country benefits. Balance of payment in home country benefits from inward flow from foreign earnings. Outward FDI creates demand for home country exports, which increases employment effects. MNE can learn skills when exposed to foreign markets, which it can be transferred back home. Home country costs. Balance of payment effect. Balance of payment may suffer from capital outflow to finance the FDI. Current account of the balance of payments may suffer if the purpose of foreign investment is to help home country by a low-cost production location. Current account on the balance of payment may suffer if the FDI is a substitute for direct export. Employment effect. The most serious employment effect would be when FDI is seen as a substitute of domestic production. Government policy instruments and FDI. Home country policies. Encouraging outward FDI. To encourage FDI, a lot of countries have eliminated double taxation on foreign income, and a lot of investor countries use their political influence to persuade host countries to relax their restrictions. Restricting outwards FDI. There are controls over outwards FDI from time to time. This is to improve the balance of payments and to make it harder for firms to do FDI. Countries sometimes manipulated tax rules to encourage firms to invest in home country. This rules is to increase jobs in home country rather than other nations. Sometimes countries prohibit national firms to invest in certain countries for political reasons. Host country policies. Encouraging inwards FDI. Countries want to gain from resource transfer and employment effects of FDI. These countries would make tax concessions, low-interest loans, and grants for subsidies. Restricting inward FDI. Ownership restraints. Foreign firms are often excluded from certain sectors on the ground of national security or competition. Ownership restraints are based on the belief that local owners can help maximize resource transfer and employment benefits. Performance requirements are controls over the behavior of MNE's local subsidiary. Some performance requires would be local content, exports, technology transfer, and local participation. Levels of economic integration. In the free trade area, all the barriers among countries are removed for trade of goods and barriers. Theoretically, free trade area has no discriminatory tariffs, quotas, subsidies, or administrative impediment, but each areas are allowed to have their own policies. In the customs union area, the trade barrier is eliminated between countries and adopts a common external trade policy. In the common market area, there are no barriers between countries that have a common external trade policy and allows factors of production to move freely among members. In the economic union area, there is a free flow between countries, have a common external trade policy, but also requires common currency, harmonization of members' tax rates, and a common monetary and fiscal policy. In the political union area, the central political structure are the coordination of economic, social, and foreign policy of the member states. The case for regional integration. The economic case for integration. Regional economic integrations can be seen as an attempt to achieve gain by free flow of trade and investment between countries. It would be easier to do a free trade flow between a limited number of countries. Coordination and policy harmonization problems is harder to solve as there are more numbers of countries, since there are more perspectives, which will make it harder to reach agreement. Attempts at regional economic integration is because of wanting to exploit the gains from free trade and investment. The political case for integration. The political case for integration is linking neighboring economies and make them dependent of each other. This will make a political cooperation between these countries and decrease potential violent conflict. Also, by grouping, it can increase the country's political power in the world. Impediments to integration. Integration is never easy to achieve and to sustain because nation as a whole will be benefited, but certain groups will lose. Also, changing to a free trade regime can involve painful adjustments. There are concerns on national sovereignty. The case against regional integration. Trade creation is when in a free trade area, high-cost domestic producers are replaced by low-cost producers. Trade diversion is when low-cost external suppliers is replaced by higher-cost suppliers in the free trade area. Usually, with the WTO rules, it will ensure that the free trade agreement will not result in trade diversion. The rules are set so that free trade area members will set tariffs not higher or restrictive to outsiders than the previous ones. But WTO does not cover some non-tariff barriers, so regional trade blocs can emerge and they are protected from the competition that is outside by high non-tariff barriers. In this case, the trade diversion effect might outweigh the trade creation effect, and the only way to avoid this is to increase the scope of WTO. Clusters. It is a geographic of interconnected companies, suppliers, and institutions that are in the same particular field. Clusters are often fit within the political boundaries, but they somewhat cross states or even national borders. Clusters rarely act like the standard industrial systems, which stops them from attracting important actors and get important relationships, which means that for others, a lot of clusters might be indistinctive or go unrecognized. Clusters affect competition in three ways: increase of productivity based on area, driving innovation, and stimulates the formation of new business. Clusters and productivity. Clusters can have better access to employees and suppliers because they can access information, technology, and needed institutions with related companies in the cluster. Being in a cluster allows companies to operate more efficiently. Companies in a cluster can search from a place where there are already a lot of experienced and specialized employees. Also, cluster signals opportunity and reduces the chance of relocation. A good cluster provides a more efficient way on obtaining inputs. Because the cluster offers a specialized base and because they are sourcing locally, there are little to no importing costs and delays. In a cluster, the extensive market, technical, and competitive information is accumulated, and members in the cluster has easy access to it. Since in a cluster they have personal relationships and the community has a lot of trust, which facilitates the flow of the information. The linkage between cluster members make better result than the sum of these parts since they complement each other. Clusters have access to institutions and public goods, which can help with the company's productivity. Company in the cluster can recruit already trained employees at a local program and get public goods such as clusters information, technology pools, and reputation. There's better motivation in clusters since the local rivalry is high, and there is peer pressure that pushes motivation. It is easier to measure and compare when in a cluster because all the local rivals share the same circumstances. Clusters and innovation. Clusters play a very important role for the ability to innovate. Sophisticated buyers are usually part of the cluster, so companies in the cluster usually have a better window on the market. Also, with the relationships with other entities in the cluster, it allows companies to learn early about new technologies, components, and machinery, and a lot of others. Clusters provide the ability to adapt faster and react faster. With competitive and peer pressure and constant comparison, it pushes innovation. Clusters and new business formation. It is easier for new companies to grow in a cluster than an isolated location. Clusters can make a new business formation because they can find the gap in the product or service that is needed to fill. Also, the needed skills, assets, inputs, and staff often are already available in the cluster. The local investors and financial institutions are already familiar with the cluster, so new companies has less risk financially and can find financial aid easily. Usually, clusters presents a local market, which can help new companies with the establishment of new relationships. Cluster implications for companies. 1. Choosing locations. Clusters suggest that locations that can give cost advantages in input can be illusory. Although the wage, tax, and utility cost is low, but the location might not have efficient infrastructure, sophisticated supplies, and other downsides. When talking about a company's home base where all the important activities happen, it is important to not only think about input costs, the company should choose a location based on total system cost and innovation potential. Multinationals would move their home base to more vibrant clusters in order to establish themselves as insiders. Clusters suggest that groups of a linked activities are better to be at the same place rather than being spread to different places. 2. Engaging locally. Social relationship is what binds clusters together, which can facilitate the access to resources and information. Being within a cluster, you need to have personal relationships and person contacts to be able to truly be an insider of the cluster. Companies need to participate in establishing local presence, local investments in order to maximize the benefits of cluster. Also, companies need to establish relationships with government bodies and local institutions. Cluster implications for companies. 3. Upgrading the cluster. The health of local business environment is important to the health of the company. By upgrading the cluster, it will help with closing the gap in the cluster that is needed to improve the services and products, also the business environment. 4. Working collectively. Usually, investments in public goods is usually seen as a government's job, but cluster thinks that by investing, it helps companies benefit from local assets and institutions. Trade associations help with providing a forum with exchange of ideas and important points to overcome an obstacle. Associations can make these activities by making a university-based testing and training programs for research. Clusters offer a better way to keep social relation between the public and private sectors. Potential impact of generative AI can be evaluated through two lenses. For the first lens, it scans the use cases for generative AI that organizations can use. The use cases means the targeted applications of generative AI for a specific business challenge and results in measurable outcomes. The second lens analyzes generative AI's potential impact on the occupations in the work activities. There is the McKinsey database that analyzes which generative AI can deliver a significant improvement in the output. They would estimate the potential annual value if generative AI use cases were adopted in the economy. This database is updated every year. With the continuous of innovation and research on generative AI, it can revolutionize the internal knowledge management system. It would change the way companies work and how they provide products and services to customers. Based on analyzing 63 use cases, generative AI can potentially generate $2.6 trillion to $4.4 trillion in value across industries. Different generative use cases will have different impacts on different business functions, and it can deliver different values depending on the industry. When talking about a possibility of a certain technology doesn't mean it can directly be used in just one click, even if the technology has been developed, but it cannot be economically doable. If the cost is too much, that it is less expensive to use human labor. Also, it takes time to adapt to a new technology. We can see from this graph that generative AI helps with decision making, data management, and physical work. But compared to data management and physical work, generative AI helps more decision making and collaboration. We can see that with generative AI, it will increase a lot the potential of automation. International trade and supply chain. The costs in transportation have fallen, being able to split up their production lines, thus in different facilities. An example of this would be the production of Apple products. Each individual artifact is assembled in China, but with other countries as suppliers. Taiwan and US as two of the biggest suppliers. If one of the three countries are going to a natural disaster, then the supply chain will be affected, resulting in delay of manufactures or missing pieces. Other shortcomings in the supply chain would be trading agreements between countries don't mix well with supply chain trade. Agreements could be enforced to ensure and help trading to be more efficient. What is competitiveness? Basic meaning of competitiveness is how countries create social, economic, and environmental conditions for economic development, creating more opportunities for people to live, grow sustainably. The idea of competitiveness helps policymakers realize which country is more productive, thus seeing a better picture of the direct impact their policies put into place. Explaining economic integration. Reduce and limits trade barriers. The European nation is part of their foreign trade zones. For every country in Europe which are part of the European nation, they are allowed to make free trade. Either taxes are lowered or even certain free trade zones don't have taxes. The formula of economic growth. To measure the economic growth, we need to take into account the optics in productivity and increased hours worked. Productivity is produced when workers produce more than they did before. This can be caused by higher level of education or investment in physical capital. Nowadays, the percentage of people working is lower than in previous years. To bring back up the percentage, it is important to put into place policies to encourage people to go back into the workforce and policies to spur investments. South Korea, the seventh biggest exporters and emerging country. Koreans are optimistic, one of the biggest reasons they survived after the Korean War. The foundation of South Korea were built on government-sponsored schemes which encouraged the growth of family business. Two big chaebols are Lucky Good Star aka LG and Samsung. Korea is LG and Samsung. Korean became a master of copycat by reproducing the same technology but with new innovations from their systems of management of cost production system to be a fast follower. Instead of focusing on quantity, Korean took a shift and focused on quality. Since Korea is built from a war, many of the citizens are bold and tough. They are not afraid to compete with other brands. It's a clothes factory is built in Indonesia. The Koreans will build their own clothes factory and compete with them. K-pop has been known for Koreans' biggest weapons. From internet being more globalized, it has been made easier for Korea to export their music. How internet has adapted and changed the Korean tradition. When a newborn has 1 year old, the Koreans have a tradition that the kid chooses a toy, and the parents would believe they will be specialized in that specific domain. Nowadays, Koreans are adding a computer mouse to symbolize IT. Why productivity growth matters. We are expecting higher standard of living, higher consumption, higher production. Therefore, it is important to keep productivity and its growth. In present days, technology is a big part of society, especially among Generation Z and Millennium. Even though great productions have been made throughout years, producers are still learning how to utilize them. Therefore, we are able to conclude that there will be an increase in productivity growth. FDI in Vietnam. They rely a lot on trade and FDI. Vietnam used to be a closed economy but are more one of the most open economies. The reason for why Vietnam's economy is attractive is due to its governmental action to promote macroeconomic stability. Three important reasons for why FDI investment is high. First is macroeconomic stability. The second is the increase in education. And lastly, investment in infrastructures. How Africa could one day rival China. One biggest issue in which Africa is facing is the number of population growth they are facing. With low education, the number of children born per housing will stay the same. The UN predicts that in 2050, population will grow to 2.5 billion and in 2100 it will double. The higher education African girls can get, the lower Africa's population is likely to be. Adding on, creating different jobs for the population is also important. A manufacturing park was built by a Chinese firm to make textiles and shoes. Ethiopia's manufacturing is a success. It triples over the past 10 years, whereas in other countries, the GDP for manufacturing has been decreasing. As a firm made a business by using solar power to heat up water. This has shown how Africa can help curb a global threat, climate change. Since Ethiopia has a lot of sunshine, they choose to use these natural unlimited resources to make a living. The key to addressing Africa's problem is better governance. Why Elon Musk and Jack Dorsey has big plans for Africa. Africa is composed to be the next takeoff as the biggest tech market. America and China has been taking action. Africans like to work with Americans since they leave knowledge behind, experience and empowerment. Since the Chinese have not shown that model, Africans have chosen partnership in which they believe they are able to improve themselves. Africa is planning to develop the Continental Free Trade Area, an agreement the director of the International Trade Center, a gamer change. Productivity is how efficient labor and resources is being used during production. What economists mean by production, it is a measure to evaluate the rise or decline of living standards. Labor productivity is the ratio of output per hour worked, and MFP is the output per unit of labor, capital, and sometimes intermediate inputs combined. The importance of MFP in growth and development of economies is because by looking at MFP in details, it makes us understand better about productivity. Although labor productivity explains the number of final output that's been affected by the number of hours of labor or the number of machines, but it was said that this calculation is ignorant of all the other effects that might cause the final number of output. That is why it is more challenging but better to analyze MFP, since you need to analyze the differences of final outputs with different inputs. Theoretically, the increased usage of using machines will cause the production to increase, but the measurements showed otherwise, so arguments suggest that there is a mismeasurement. A lot of work activities are being disrupted by new technologies. Even when a lot of investment has been sunk, technologies are being disrupted, causing productivity growth to decline. But economists believe that it's just a matter of time. After adaptations is made, productivity will go back up again, maybe even higher. The decrease of productivity is caused by the increased number of aging workers and ill workers. With slower population growth and declining labor force participation, it would decrease the need for capital and formation. This would be subtracted from the aggregate demand and causing the productivity growth to decrease even more. With the globalization, it complicates the changes in productivity. The less expensive exports threatens the manufacturing workers. The impact of technology is in polarization of the workforce. Although trade costs decreased and connections increased, but it did not show an increase in productivity. Low interest rate leads to the problem of low demand, then leading to a liquidity trap. People would buy less and investment increases, which decrease economic confidence, which further worsens the savings glut and low inflation. This will cause decrease in productivity. There are some ups and downs. Although productivity is lower, but with globalization, we can get a lot of different goods, and with better technology, our lives are better. But people are working more hours and they gain less wage. An increase in the level of productivity will allow people to have what they want faster and more. As productivity increases, it will increase supply, leading to decrease in price and increase in wage. The decrease in productivity in France is due to the shift in productive structure towards lower productive gains. With the contribution of information and communication technologies, productivity growth has decreased. With the dispersion of performance, it has led to productivity decrease. But France is still counted as one of the most productive countries due to high level of training and education provided by the government. The current period of secular stagnation is not similar to the post-Great Depression era, because during the post-Great Depression, there was very little private investment due to closing of the frontier and the decrease in immigrants. The secular stagnation today is because we're at a stage of adjusting to new technologies. Also, the financial crisis brought a permanent supply loss and insufficient demand for investment. After 1970, education investment was reduced and the quality of teaching decreased, which has a negative impact. During the Great Depression, output plummeted by 26%, much more severe than during the Great Recession. However, the Great Recession exhibited a slower recovery than that of the Great Depression, with output growth 1/3 lower than during the peace recovery. With slow recovery of the Great Depression, U.S. faces secular stagnation, high supply of savings, and low level of demand, resulting in low interest rates. Citizens in the U.S. are pulling out their money, causing certain banks foreclosure. A prolonged period of low productivity will affect the GDP or the economic output. With low productivity, it would lead to low employment rate. The hypothesis of the decline in productivity is the same for developed countries, and it can have a big impact on these developed countries. So governments can lower real interest rates and increase investment to stimulate demand. This would mean to increase inflation target, increase public investment in order to push private investments. By increasing the retirement age would help, but it would be better to improve productivity on younger workers and increasing immigration. It is also possible to give better educational opportunities and training support. Businesses can play a role by increasing their own productivity. Businesses can start with producing less complicated by giving more achievable goals, providing better employee training, and have a more organized production cycle. Businesses can invest in better research and development. With advanced technology, it did affect policy decisions. For example, instead of trying to increase labor productivity, they would think about providing more advanced technical skills training. Also, observers argued that with robots, it would be more important for people to develop more human-based skills. In response to automation, people need to keep on learning. Even when working, they need to learn. By putting barriers to stop globalization would be harmful for the economy, and global integration actually improves productivity. Lagarde expressed that by reinforcing trade, it will help reduce uncertainty and increase productivity. In order to restrain automation, some supported the idea of adding tax to robots, but others were concerned about adopting automation and claimed that we might end up having a universal basic income in the future. Economies cannot simultaneously achieve these three goals. It is because they are not mutually compatible with each other. So, sustainable goals and productivity goals. Global warming can have a negative impact on productivity growth because it can affect agriculture in a negative way, which would decrease the productivity. Carbon emission causes global warming, which would affect productivity, but productivity can also cause an increase in the output of carbon emission. Being more sustainable would help increase the life expectancy. And on overall, higher life expectancy have a positive impact on productivity growth. With sustainable agriculture, it improves the security of food, which is important on the labor productivity. So a sustainable agriculture will affect the productivity growth positively. Greater inclusion and productive goals. With inclusion, you can work with different people who have different knowledge and skills, which help with innovation and creativity. This can help the productivity goals by giving different experiences, skills to help increase productivity. Being inclusive will make employees happier, which can boost labor productivity. Being inclusion is about working with different people, so sometimes there might be miscommunication, misunderstanding, which can cause lower productivity.